But first to our top story this morning, as the 112th Congress files into Washington this week, slashing government spending is front and center for the GOP and on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today.
Yeah, big headlines now. There's a new Republican majority in the House, including Tea Party members who say they were elected with just one purpose, and that was, as you say, to cut spending.
But some are even warning that they will not vote to increase the debt ceiling, our nation's debt ceiling this year. The U.S. Treasury is estimating that we will hit the $14.3 trillion debt limit during the first or second quarter of this year.
And that's where things get interesting. The Obama administration's top economic advisor saying yesterday Republican lawmakers, as he put it, shouldn't play chicken with the debt limit. Here he is.
If we hit the debt ceiling, that's essentially defaulting on our obligations, which is totally unprecedented in American history. The impact on the economy would be catastrophic.
And speaking of catastrophic, here to weigh in on that is Peter Schiff, CEO and Chief Global Strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital, joining us from Stamford, Connecticut. Peter, is it one thing to use raising the debt ceiling as a bargaining chip to cut spending and say, I won't vote to raise it unless you do X with spending, but to say I'm not going to raise it at all, that would be catastrophic, would it not? And it would cause the U.S. to default.
No. First of all, Dagan, Happy New Year. But it would be catastrophic for the government. You see, not raising the debt ceiling isn't default because we have an option. See, we could cut spending so we don't have to default. You see, what's really scary here...
It only works if you cut spending to the point that you balance the budget and will never, ever have to borrow another dollar.
But that's what we want. But listen, he is saying...
But it's in that
Dagan,
scenario it works, but otherwise it doesn't work. If we keep borrowing money, we will eventually hit that debt ceiling, even if it's only $1 a quarter.
Dagan, let me make this point because it's very important. This is an official announcement from our government that we're running a Ponzi scheme. Think about what he's saying. If we can't borrow more money, if we can't go deeper into debt, then we're going to default. We're not going to pay back the money that we've already borrowed. That is exactly what Bernie Madoff did. I don't see how Standard & Poor's or Moody's can't cut the U.S. rating to junk based on that. Why would anybody in the world want to hold U.S. treasuries if we're saying the minute we can't borrow more money, we're going to default?
But we can borrow more money theoretically. This is an arbitrary limit. The U.S. government, by that, we shouldn't have any limit at all. The U.S. government can go out and borrow for 10 years at less than 3.4%. The market is not telling the U.S. government that it's worried about default. But this would be an arbitrary level that triggers default.
No, but we're admitting. See, at some point in the future, foreigners aren't going to want to lend us money. And then we have two choices: cut government spending or default. And basically what we're saying is the minute we can't go deeper into debt, for whatever reason, if we can't go deeper into debt, then we're going to default. That's what we're saying. They're not saying, look, if we can't raise the debt ceiling, we're going to make cuts to government spending or we're going to raise taxes. What are they saying? If we can't raise the debt ceiling, that's it. We're not going to pay back the money we borrowed.
By not raising the debt ceiling, but then and that's the line in the sand, rather than first talking about cutting spending. That's kind of putting the cart before the horse. The issue is that we need to balance our budget, that we need to cut our spending. But in the interim, you're not going to, why force the U.S. to default on its debt? We need to borrow more money just to pay off the old debt, to pay the interest.
No, we don't. We can cut government spending. You know, all of the politicians who are saying that they're going to vote to raise the debt ceiling, almost all of them are for a balanced budget amendment. That's the same thing. What if we passed a balanced budget amendment? Would that mean that we would have to default? No, it would mean we have to balance the budget. All the debt ceiling means is that we have to stop borrowing.
But Peter, we're talking about Washington. Right? I mean, in a perfect world, I want to be as tan as Snooki and as skinny as Claudia Schiffer, but it's not going to happen. So what I'm saying is that to get from a $1.3 trillion budget deficit to balancing the budget before we hit the debt ceiling is impossible. You would admit that, won't you?
The government needs some kind of discipline. I mean, what's the point of even having a debt ceiling if every time we get to the ceiling we raise it? I mean, what kind of ceiling is that? If it's supposed to mean something, that there's some kind of limit on government borrowing, if we routinely raise the debt ceiling every time we get there, the whole thing is a farce.
So you would let the U.S. So you're in favor of letting the U.S. government default on its debts just to send the message? Because that's what happens.
Well, how do we know? Why don't we force them to cut spending? I want discipline. You know, when I ran in the primary in Connecticut for a senator, part of my platform was I personally wanted to lead the filibuster against raising the debt ceiling. I don't want to kick the can down the road anymore. I want to have a hard cap on government spending, and I want to force politicians to do what they don't want to do.
But not raising the debt ceiling would cause the Armageddon that you've been preaching.
What's going to be Armageddon is if we keep raising it and we keep printing money to finance it and we destroy our currency. That's Armageddon. If we can force fiscal responsibility on Washington, we'll avoid Armageddon. That's the only way we're going to avoid it.
But so you're saying that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we won't default?
Well, you know, ultimately...
Because ultimately we will. If we can't cut spending, we will default.
The reality of it is, Dagan, we've borrowed so much money that there's no way to pay it back legitimately. So if we can't inflate, we will default. But maybe we can have an organized restructuring where we don't pay 100 cents on the dollar, but we give our creditors real money. The way we're going right now, we're going to give them monopoly money. And so everybody is going to lose.
Peter, it's good to see you. As always, fiery, fired up. Happy New Year. Peter Schiff.
Happy New Year, Dagan.